The House committee investigating the attack on the Capitol is deciding if it will hold former President Trump's longtime advisor, Steve Bannon, in criminal contempt of Congress. The committee will vote this week whether to formally prosecute Bannon for failing to comply with a subpoena to appear before them. The bipartisan panel has also asked former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, former Deputy Chief of Staff Dan Scavino, former Pentagon official Kash Patel, and former top Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark to testify or provide documents. Legal experts say Bannon's potential prosecution could set a new precedent that may force others to talk. For more, I want to bring in CBS News legal contributor and professor at Loyola Law School, Jessica Levinson. Hi, Jessica. So what is the likelihood that lawmakers will try to send Steve Bannon to jail?
I think it's very high. At this point, he has not cooperated with the Select Committee at all. And they have said in no uncertain terms, that's not okay. We don't want to continue to set the precedent that you can just view a subpoena as a dinner invitation and it's optional. So they scheduled very quickly that Select Committee would vote on whether or not to refer this matter to the Department of Justice. The next step is that the full House votes. If you look at the makeup of the House, I think that would also be an affirmative vote. And then the Department of Justice has to make an independent assessment as to whether or not to charge Steve Bannon with criminal contempt of Congress. Just looking at the publicly available facts here, I think that there are a lot of federal prosecutors who would take that case. It is, of course, precedent setting, but I think in the right direction, telling people that a valid congressional subpoena is not an optional matter.
Well, what can lawmakers do to enforce the subpoenas? Is there anything short of actually sending them to jail for noncompliance?
So there's a couple of different routes for lawmakers, and they frankly haven't, quote unquote, gone nuclear, used all of their routes. So one route which hasn't been used for 100 years is actually to use their inherent contempt power and to say, we can send the sergeant of arms, have him try and find Steve Bannon and detain him, or ask a DC jail to detain him. Again, that hasn't been used for a century. We haven't heard any members of Congress say they want to do that. That's more people from the outside like me saying, basically, it's there, give it a try if you think it's the appropriate moment. Then Congress can also bring an action in court, a civil action. And then the third route is really the one that we've talked about, where they not only vote to hold somebody in contempt of Congress, but they say, we're referring this to the Department of Justice. So those are really the three main options for lawmakers.
So talk to us about executive privilege and how it plays in the defense of President Trump's former aides.
Yeah, it's such a good question. Executive privilege is kind of this amorphous topic. It's not specifically, of course, in the Constitution. We recognize it as something that is enforceable, and it basically allows presidents, in talking to their senior advisors, to have some privacy, to know that when they have to make really difficult and or sensitive decisions that could bring up national security issues, that they can have a free conversation without feeling like, well, I really wanted to follow up with you about this sensitive matter, but it might someday be subpoenaed. And it really asks judges later on to say, what's the benefit here to the public obtaining this information versus what's the benefit to presidents and his advisors to knowing that they can have private conversations? Now, in this case, at least with respect to the first set of documents that the House Select Committee asked for, President Biden's White House looked at this, and I'm paraphrasing here, but said a version of, you don't get to use the constitutional protections of executive privilege when you may have tried to subvert the Constitution. So I think that at least what we're looking at now with respect to Steve Bannon, it's a particularly weak case because he wasn't even in the White House. Now, when we get to people like former acting Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, then you might have the Biden White House make a slightly different determination, in part because President Biden's White House is also thinking about how would this potentially affect us in the future, and how will this affect future occupants of the Oval Office. Presidents tend not to like to water down executive privilege because they themselves can be protected by it.
But an interesting point about Steve Bannon not having one of those government positions at the time. As we're discussing executive privilege, Jessica, can President Trump really offer protection to his former aides? Or in the case of Bannon, a former advisor that wasn't part of the government?
So great question, following up on what we just talked about. So he can try. I mean, with Steve Bannon, let's remember, he left the White House in 2017, which of course is years before the insurrection on January 6, 2021. Now, people have heard me say this a lot when it comes to certain issues raised by the Trump administration, which is we don't know for sure. We don't have clear answers. A court has never said specifically, if you're no longer a member of the White House, you absolutely cannot basically piggyback off of the president's claim of executive privilege. However, I think Steve Bannon really has a weak claim here. And let's remember that he's trying to hitch his wagon essentially to President Trump's claim of executive privilege, which at least with respect to some of the information that the House Select Committee has asked for, have basically said no claim of executive privilege here. National Archives, go ahead and give that House Select Committee that information. So it's former President Trump's best try. I mean, I think it's really his only avenue left. And again, the Biden White House is going to be weighing the public interest in having this information versus, I think, their fear that they're going to set a precedent which really weakens executive privilege.
All right, Jessica Levinson, thank you.
Thank you.